Thank you all for joining, and thank you for your patience as we worked out some of the technological difficulties. It's crazy to me that we are still in this pandemic Zoom world, and still, I feel like every time I use Zoom, I'm struggling with it. But in any case, this talk is called Say My Name, Understanding the Power of Names, Correct Pronunciation, and Personal Narratives. And it was originally given as part of the Stanford University Leadership Education Advancing Diversity, or LEAD program, and originally was presented at the Diversity and Inclusion Forum in May of 2021. And we can go on to the next slide. These are the scholars who helped to create this talk, and as well as our mentors who very kindly guided us through the process of creating the workshop. The learning objectives are to examine the importance of name pronunciation and identity affirmation, illustrate the historical instances of racism that contribute to name mispronunciation, employ tools to engage in productive conversation around name pronunciation, and apply name affirmation tools to case scenarios in a clinical and medical education setting. So at different points throughout this, I will ask people to kind of share as we go through some case-based discussions and just have some general conversation. Luckily, we have a small group, so it'll be nice for us to kind of all participate and contribute. So what's in a name? At their core, names are a reflection of identity, and they often have meaning to an individual that tie them to racial, ethnic, cultural, or religious groups. And author Beth Nguyen highlights the tension between individual and societal roles of names in this quote that reads, "Names are deeply personal and deeply public." So with that in mind, we can go into our first breakout session. And since our group is quite small, we'll just all kind of talk together in this group. And so I'll ask people to just unmute themselves to introduce yourself with your name and an accompanying story that has either the meaning of your name or some aspect of how your name adds to your identity. And just to start things off, I can share with you all my name. So my name is Salma Dali. Originally, this is an Arabic name. I am of Sudanese background in Sudan, Africa, where the primary language in North Sudan is Arabic. The name, though, because there was like a lot of overlap between the Moorish influence in Spain and the Arabic language, often gets confused for a Spanish name or a name that's of Latinx origin. And so, for example, like Salma Hayek is a popular person with the same name, Salma. And funnily enough, actually, when I immigrated to the US on my green card, they wrote that I was Mexican because my name was Salma Dali. Another kind of fun thing about it is that since my last name is Dali, people always ask me if I have any relationship to the artist Salvador Dali, and I'm always disappointed to say that no, in fact, I don't have any artistic talent at all. The similarities stop with my name. In Arabic, it's actually pronounced Salma Dali, and I actually prefer to use in English to pronounce it as Salma Dali. So that is just an example of my name and kind of what it means to me and the background of my name. And I would love if we could just all go around and share our names. Maybe Dr. Williams, if you want to kick things off by sharing a story about your name too, and then we can all have turns.
Well, my name, as you can see, is Renee Williams. It's nothing special. It's the word. My mom had my name picked out from she was 12 years old. She knew she wanted to name her first daughter Renee. And hold on one second. Someone did. She knew she wanted to name her first daughter Renee, and it means born again or reborn. It's a French origin name. The name Williams, interestingly enough, which I'll say I've always seen, it's a last name I've always associated with people of color, is a very common name in Wales. Because I looked into the background of the name Williams. Williams is one of the most common or second most common name in Wales, interestingly. I went to Ireland years ago. I came across a lot of redheaded Williams. I don't know if that means anything, but I was surprised. But generally speaking, when I come across some of the last name Williams in America, they tend to be a black person. So I just always affiliated it there, but it's actually very common in Welsh name.
That's so interesting that you found a lot of your experience in Ireland. That's really
I was like, there's a lot of people with the last name Williams. I was like, wow.
No kidding. All right. And whoever wants to go next, you can feel free to unmute yourselves. This is casual. And for people who just joined, we're just going around sharing our names, the pronunciation, an accompanying story, the meaning of it, or just some aspect of your name that adds to your identity.
Yeah, sure. I'm Stefan Duran. Probably the most interesting thing I can share about my name is I get called Steve all the time. So, um, not a great amount of insight into backgrounds and such. I think folks of different heritage often assume someone else's name is maybe of their heritage. So I've gotten all kind of things from French to Spanish to, whatever have you. So that is my story.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Stefan.
Actually, I will add. So interestingly enough, I went to France years ago, and on the plane, the guy was like, "People are going to think you're French." I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "You have a French name and you look French." I don't know how I look French. Don't ask me. When I was in France, though, people kept coming up and talking to me in French. And I'm like, "I don't speak French," but he was like, "You look French and you have a French name." I was like, "Okay." Of being mistaken for other ethnicities.
I can go next. My name is Kara Burke, and my parents say that Kara is an Irish name. I've seen like varying things, but Burke is a very Irish last name, and my family is very Irish. And even though I don't live near where I grew up, it's the type of name that I often, everywhere I've lived, people will come up to me and say, "Oh, do you know this Burke? Do you know this Burke?" And I often have people, especially older men, say to me, "Oh, what a nice Irish name." So it definitely, I think, among Irish people has that like reputation. And the only other thing I'll mention is that when I got married, there were a lot of reasons I didn't change my name, but one of them was that I felt like it, but probably because of that history, like I felt like it described me well. And my husband is Jewish and Polish, and his last name I just didn't think suited me in the same way. So that was one of the kind of like superficial reasons that I didn't change my name when I got married.
Yeah, then the question of kind of the ties between your name and your identity comes up a lot. I think particularly when thinking about, whether or not to change your name, especially in a professional setting. That's something that quite commonly comes up when you've built not only your personal identity, but a whole professional identity that might be tied to one particular name. And then this question often comes up of, okay, well, if I change my name, how do I do this? Where do I go from here? Thanks for sharing, Kara.
Good morning. My name is Charmaine Chakapuzer. So Charmaine means charming, and like my parents, I think they just picked the name out of a baby book. But Opuzer means you carry yourself in a way that you get respect from others. And, I take pride in my name because like I take pride in my culture, even though I wasn't born there. Like I'm still very immersed in my culture because my parents are immigrants, and I just take pride in everything they've done for me to be here.
That's awesome, Charmaine. What a beautiful backstory and meaning of your name. Thank you. For people who just joined, we're just going around and sharing our names and any accompanying story about the meaning of our name or the background of our name, or just some aspect of how your name adds to your identity. And you can just feel free to unmute yourself, and then we can go around. I would call on people, but part of this exercise is learning how to pronounce people's names. So in an effort to not mispronounce anyone's name right off the bat, I'll allow you guys to just unmute one at a time and introduce yourselves.
I can introduce myself. My name is Ashley Rogers. I don't really have a very interesting story, and I think this is actually bringing that to attention for me. I don't really know where my name specifically came from. My family is Italian, so it's not my Italian side last name. And for me, just keeping that last name has always meant something to me just because that's who I am professionally. So I think that that's something that would just stick with me in my career. It's nice to meet everyone.
I think M&A has her hand up.
Hi, everyone. Oh, it's okay now? Okay. I'm Emine Chikanabala, and my name comes from three religion, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish. It means trustworthy. I think all of you know say Amen or Amin in different languages. So that's the background of my name. It's very hard for people to pronounce my name. There is now a little app that you can put next to your name in your emails, and it says pronounced, because I have been called Emin, Emini. I have been called very different names. So it is a struggle, and especially if you're in a meeting, because people, they don't know how to pronounce your name, you're left out. They don't want to reach out and talk to you because they feel uncomfortable with it. So this is a very timely and very nice presentation. Thank you, Salma.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You hit on so many important themes that we're going to talk about throughout the course of this talk. I love the combination of having this, intersection of different religions tied to your name and kind of the meaning that that brings and how it ties together so many different groups, as well as some of the things you talked about some of the resources we'll get into a little bit later. Thanks.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Lahe Yamane, and I think I've had an evolution of how I feel about my name throughout my life. When I was younger, I thought nobody else has this. I'm weird. Everyone has trouble saying it. And so I actually went a large part of my life with telling people, I don't even know when it stuck. I think it was probably in daycare when I asked my family, but being called Lahia. And so part of my life called me that, and part of my life called me Lahia. And it was finally, I don't know, around college or something, I had a midlife, oh my gosh, what am I doing? My name is Lahia. So have now been a big proponent around owning your name. It is who you are, an important part of who you are. And so I actually take a lot of pride in it now, but so really try to impart on others that your name is not hard. It's just unpracticed, maybe for some particular cultures or things like that. And so, and my name, my parents are from Eritrea. And so my name is from Giz, which is an old language that is kind of from Eritrea and Ethiopia. So it's actually pretty unique even in that culture. And so now I take it as something that I feel really proud about.
Hi, I'm Cindy Amilcar. Oh, sorry.
No, please get it. Go ahead, Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy Amilcar. People pronounce my name. Hello? I feel like there's a little static on my end.
No, we can hear you perfectly.
Oh, okay. Amilcar, but it's not. It's Amilcar. I respond to both, and I try to correct people, and I think they have a struggle with putting the emphasis on the A or the M. I don't think my name has necessarily a meaning behind it. It's a combination of French, Creole, and Portuguese. But I normally, when I have a medical student who is working with me and they have a name that's a little bit more hard to pronounce, they usually give me a nickname. And I'm like, no, tell me your name. I want to know exactly how you say your name and correct me when I'm wrong. So I try when I'm on shift or at work to pronounce names exactly how they are spelled or pronounced, because I know how important it is for me. So I do my best. I don't always pronounce them correctly, but I encourage them to, teach me how to pronounce your name, because it's so important to who you are as a person. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it looks like one more person joined. If you'd like to just unmute yourself and tell us your name, how to pronounce it, any kind of background about it or personal meaning that it has to your name, and then we can move on after that.
Okay, maybe we can just keep going. And if anybody would like to share any additional stories about their names, then you're always welcome to unmute throughout the talk and do so. The reason that we're talking about this is because name mispronunciation is an issue of inclusivity. So as we learned just now from hearing everyone's stories, and thank you all again so much for sharing, names really are essential to a person's identity and a way to show respect. Chronic mispronunciation can lead to an individual feeling marginalized and undervalued, and actually may be experienced as a microaggression, even if that's not what's intended. So using someone's correct name, similar to pronouns, for example, is really a way to validate their existence. And that can be immensely useful in all situations, from increasing trust and communication among coworkers to providing support to patients, or even to de-escalating tense situations. And we can see many examples of this throughout the literature. One of the impacts that we can see of name pronunciation is this quote from Yejin Lee, who says, "When my colleagues don't bother putting in the work of pronouncing my name correctly, I sense that I'm not worth the effort. And whether it's right or wrong, this makes me remember the times in my life when I was made to feel different and most unwelcome." And really, this remains to be an ongoing issue. And we can click through just the many examples that we see here. One example is "America Ruined My Name for Me" by Beth Nguyen. Another example is, "If you don't know how to say someone's name, just ask. Say my name correctly. Why pronouncing names is important." There are also many examples of how this can be tied to microaggressions, such as in "It's well past time white people learn how to say everyone's names correctly." And we can also see impacts of this in the classroom, such as this article, "The Lasting Impact of Mispronouncing Students' Names," where it shows that students can be negatively affected, and that can lead them to shy away from their own backgrounds. And this can also have a lasting impact in the way that their education works. So we'll just do a small poll, and I'll ask everyone actually just to use the raise hands feature on Zoom here. And the way that you can do that on the computer is just click the reactions button, or if you're on your phone, you can click that little 3 dots more button to raise your hand. So I'm curious to know, have you ever mispronounced someone's name? So raise your hand if the answer here is yes, or you can type hand into the chat, or say yes into the chat if you're having trouble. Yeah, all right. It looks like most of us have, in fact, mispronounced someone else's name, which is to be expected. And then another quick poll: has your name ever been mispronounced? I see a lot of people nodding along, and I remember from the stories that people shared that, unsurprisingly, most of us have had experience with our name being mispronounced as well.
Not so much about my name has never been mispronounced. What I've noticed is people like to give you nicknames. It's interesting. I haven't gotten nicknames, but people like to give you nicknames sometimes when people have difficult names, I've noticed. But even like the name Robert becomes Bob or Rob.
Exactly,
Like,
yeah. And even that can be a form of really mispronouncing someone's name, or changing their identity, or just failing to recognize the way that they want to be called can really also be a microaggression, whether or not it's pronunciation or changing someone's name or giving them a nickname that they didn't choose for themselves. It's different when someone chooses for themselves a different name that they want to go by versus somebody assigning them a different name. And so we can move on. What do we know about this? There is a 2012 article called "Teachers, Please Learn Our Names: Racial Microaggressions in the K-12 Classroom," which highlights that the classroom is a pivotal place for children, and teachers often spend more time with children than their parents. They play such a large role in their students' lives. And in this study, students recounted instances of being renamed, like Dr. Williams was just mentioning, with more traditionally Western sounding names, or having names even approximated to objects or joked about, or other instances like this. The children in this study also identified experiences that they were having in the classroom related to names as racial microaggressions. They examined internalized microaggressions that students experienced and understood that these experiences cause them to feel anxiety, shame, or feelings of othering. And as we know, experiencing these racial microaggressions can often be internalized to the point that it has a long-lasting effect and impact well beyond just the school age period, but really into someone's adult life as well. And Cindy, it looks like you raised your hand. Go ahead. Or I don't know if that was from before, maybe.
Yeah, sorry. I think that was from before.
No problem.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. In the New Yorker piece, America Ruined My Name for Me from 2021 that I mentioned earlier, author Beth Nguyen shares an intimate example of how mispronunciation of a cherished name degraded it to a common insult. This piece is an autobiographical account by this author, Beth Nguyen, whose given name, spelled B-I-C-H, is pronounced Bick, but she recounts the complexity of living with a name that often draws commentary, as well as the intricacies of changing one's name. So as mentioned, her given name, Bick, was changed by her to Beth. And she highlights the dichotomy of changing one's name and the impact that it has by saying this: "It was a double bind. The people who made me uncomfortable with my given name also thought that I'd be betraying my heritage by changing it. What I have always wanted is impossible, to be nameless, free from the gaze." Beyond these instances of name mispronunciation as a microaggression in the classroom, we can actually trace some of the roots of the history of racism and name mispronunciation. And so I'd like to play this video, Dr. Williams, if you're able to pull up the YouTube video. And it actually starts at 7 minutes and 36 seconds. The video that we'll watch is by Amber Ruffin, who is a comedian who's featured on the channel Peacock, which I will reserve my own personal feelings about the Peacock channel. But in any case, she's a comedian who has a nightly show, and she really kind of jokingly points about some of these about name mispronunciation. And even through her comedy, we're able to see the impact. Oh, and Dr. Williams, I think we're not able to hear the sound.
Oh, sorry. You're right. Yeah. Hold on one second. I have to change my, hold on. Let me see. I need to change the audio from my end. Give me 1 second.
Sure. Thank you.
Change my audio because I have it on the phone right now. That's why. 1 second. Let me. Audio. From the phone.
Oh, and actually, we're still not able to hear it for some reason.
I'm so sorry. I'm muted. I muted myself. Let me start over again. My apologies. This is here we go. My apologies.
I don't know if others can hear it. It sounded like it started playing in the beginning, the sound, and then it cut out.
What happened?
The sound started playing at the beginning, but then it cut out.
Oh, that's odd. I can still hear it. Play again.
I don't know if you're connected to headphones, maybe.
I shouldn't be. Can you hear me okay now? Or
we can hear you. I don't know if we can hear the
computer
sound.
audio.
If you try to unshare the video and then share your screen again, on the bottom left corner, there should be a button for the audio.
Thank you, Ashley. See, I told y'all, even I'm glad that there are others here to help, because I still somehow feel like I don't know how to use Zoom.
And sometimes, Renee, too, you have to take off the, well, let's see if this works.
Can you hear it?
It's not playing.
No.
Press.
Thank you for sharing that.
All right, let me go back to the press.
And while you're pulling that up, we can just talk about the video. That video is one of my favorite. I think it's one of the most powerful ways that illustrates the importance of this topic. And as highlighted in the video, there's really a complex history between racism and names. During the slave era, enslaved people were given European sounding names to replace their last names. And the new last name was often the name of the slave owner. And as we heard, after emancipation, many former enslaved people changed their names and incorporated African names and sounds into their names. There's also complexity in westernizing names. Some may choose to anglicize their names to fit in or not draw commentary, as we saw author Beth Nguyen do, while others view reclaiming their names as a way to reclaim their identity. It's an individual preference, and really it can be quite tricky, as we know that there's often a dichotomy between the personal meaning and the public meaning of our names. We can view the tangible effects of racism even today, as evidenced in this 2003 study. Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal, a field experiment on labor market discrimination? So this study actually found that there was a 50% gap in callback rates for job applications between Western sounding names and racial and ethnic minority sounding names. To emphasize that, a 50% gap in callback names and callback rates. And additionally, this graph here shows results of another study in 2016 by King et al., which shows that whitened names on resumes produced more callbacks for jobs than non-whitened names. So beyond just the impact that it has to our personal identity, imagine applying for a job with your given name on your resume that might have some personal meaning or identity to you, and not getting a callback for your job simply on the basis of your name. I've actually personally, unfortunately, had an experience with this where I was a receptionist at one point working for a company, and I was going to call someone, and my boss overheard me on the phone and specifically told me, Salma, we don't want to call anybody whose name is XYZ. And when questioned about why, he very quickly went back into, took his words back. And then this is another popular video that I'm sure many people have seen. It's a Key and Peele video. Thank you. Sorry for all of the back and forth with the videos, but this is the last one. And I can pull up the audio again on my screen once it's shared. So Key and Peele are comedians, and beyond that actually also are actors and producers and have actually had many prolific works, but they are probably most famous for a sketch show that they produce called Key and Peele. And they have a lot of different skits, but this is actually one of the most popular skits. So we can
hear it this time. Can you hear it?
No.
All right, so you play the audio then.
Okay, I'll play the audio. Okay, go ahead. It was an example where he pronounces the name Aaron as Aaron. I feel like that's, if people don't know and have heard that, that's where it comes from. It comes from this video.
Oh, Aaron.
Aaron, yeah. Now that we've talked a lot about the importance of names and why correct pronunciation is really essential, I want to talk about some tools for name mispronunciation, or for correct name pronunciation. First off, starting with asking people how to pronounce their names, as this is something I think a lot of us often struggle with. The best way to ask someone is really just ask. Some examples that you can say is, what do you prefer that I call you? And what do you prefer to be called in front of others? This highlights the fact that while someone might have one identity that they prefer to go by, for example, in their personal life, they might have another identity in a professional setting, or for example, they might have one identity in front of their friends and a different identity in front of their family or coworkers. So it's really important that you ask, what do you prefer that I call you in front of others as well? And then listen carefully to where a person puts the emphasis and the inflection. So we heard some examples today about people putting the emphasis on the wrong part of their name, and we'll get a little bit later into strategies of how to phonetically spell your name. when you hear someone's name, repeat after them once or twice, but not more. Studies have shown that repeating someone's name multiple times or asking them or saying some story about their name can actually often lead to feelings of otherness more than what's intended. So in addition to that, just thank them for sharing and then move on, avoid dwelling or saying, oh, that's such a unique name, or I've never heard something like that. Something that we might think is highlighting how unique they are might actually be something that causes them to feel very othered. Another key thing is just practice, practice, practice. That's really one of the most important parts of this. And if you forget to say how to say someone's name, you can clarify and say, remind me how to pronounce your name again. And it's also important to own your mistakes and correct them. So you can say something along the lines of, I realize I've been saying your name wrong. I'm sorry. Or it's really important to me that I learn how to say your name correctly. Can you remind me how to say it? These are some online resources that I think a lot of you actually already know about. One of them is pronouncednames.com and one of them is nameshouts.com. And so these are actually websites that you can enter in someone's name and it brings up common pronunciations in a lot of different languages. You can see at the example on the left, pronouncednames.com. If you type in a name, it has the pronunciation in different languages so that you can practice it. And on the right, we put in an example of one of the scholars of this talk, Megha. And her name you can see is common in many different languages, including Bengali, Hindi, and Tamil, and it shows the different pronunciations for each of those names. One caveat to this is that it's still important to ask someone how they prefer their name to be pronounced, especially because we can see that even the same name can have different pronunciations in different languages or even in the same language. Some other websites are namecoach.com and names.com. And like I said, because there can be different pronunciations, this actually allows someone to record the pronunciation of their own name and link it so that others can hear how they pronounce their own name and can practice it privately. And the great thing about this is that this can actually be included right in your email address or in your LinkedIn, for example, or other social media profiles so that people can link to it. And then there are some phonetic pronunciation tools as well. One of the most popular phonetic pronunciation tools is using the sounds like format. So for example, Kim Lamagna sounds like lasagna. There are also all these fancy pronunciation keys. I'm sure that a lot of us don't have these keyboard keys or know how to do it. So to simplify things, the way that you can phonetically write out your name is to put a hyphen in between the different syllables of your name. So for example, my name is Salma, 2 syllables, so I put in a hyphen between the syllables. And then to capitalize the letters of the syllable that's emphasized. So you all can see that I've already changed my name with the SAL part capitalized to indicate that that's where the emphasis lies, Salma, rather than Salma, for example. There are also tools for correcting mispronunciation of names. I think this is a common experience that we all have, as evidenced by that poll earlier. And it can be really awkward to correct someone when they mispronounce your name or when you hear that they mispronounce someone else's name. And there are different ways to handle this. One way is to just be direct and say, hey, it's not a big deal, but you've said my name 3 times and you're still getting it wrong. It's actually Salma. Or for example, you can say, I noticed that you've been calling me Valerie. In fact, it's Mallory. You say it with an M in front, Mallory. One good way to do this is right at the beginning of an introduction when someone calls you the incorrect name. For example, in this conversation, it's great to meet you, Christine. Thank you. Actually, my name is Christina with an A. People confuse it all the time. It's so nice meeting you as well, to kind of de-emphasize the stress or nervousness that people feel with pronouncing names or embarrassment. Or as an example of one of our scholars' husbands, you can also inject some humor into name correction. So in this example, my name is actually JB, but don't worry, I've been called much worse. Or you can also put the emphasis on yourself instead, if that's kind of more of your style. So saying something like, oh gosh, I haven't taken the time to tell you that in fact, my name is pronounced Anya, like Tanya. And this combines another tool as well, the sounds like tool. One kind of more less aggressive way to do this is to refer to yourself in the third person, saying something like, my friend said to me, Abdullah, I can't believe you did that. That's an example from another scholar in our group. And then this example is also helpful when you're correcting if you hear somebody else's name mispronounced. You can say something along the lines of, oh, I think his name is actually pronounced Abdullah, but why don't we ask him? So now it's time to apply our knowledge. So I'll have everyone just change your name on Zoom to the phonetic pronunciation of your name. So again, that's putting a hyphen between the syllables and capitalizing them, or you can use sounds like pronunciation. And in order to change your name on Zoom, you can just click participants and then click your name and more, and then rename. So I'll give everyone just 1 to 2 minutes to do this. And if you need an example, you can refer to my name. Awesome. I love seeing the way that people have phonetically pronounced their names. It's so great now that we've heard how everyone says their name as well, to see it kind of spelled out. And then maybe we can move on to the next slide. We'll talk about some tools for application to healthcare, since this will be relevant to many of us here. So in healthcare, it's really important to ask how people prefer to be addressed, and asking patients and family. So for example, I am a pediatrics resident, and in pediatrics, we often refer to parents as mom or dad. And there are studies that show that this actually can make parents feel a great sense of importance, of feeling like that's their role. But there are also other studies and anecdotes where people say, I don't like when people call me mom. I have a name and that's not my entire identity. And so it's really important to ask a parent too, what do you prefer to go by? Another reason this is important is because often in medicine, particularly in adult medicine, we assume formality and call people by their last name, and often apply gendered or pronouns into this. And so we might say Mrs. Wang when maybe that's not what that person or patient prefers to go by. Additionally, asking colleagues how they prefer to be addressed in various contexts. So for example, a resident in the clinical team might prefer to go by first name, but in front of patients or colleagues might prefer to go by Dr. So-and-so, or have a different professional title. And then some patient-facing tips are, when in doubt, you can always go formal. It's really often better to ask someone how they pronounce their name, but if you're not able to ask them how to pronounce their name, or if there's any question, you can always refer more to formality. And then check titles carefully to see if the patient has a title that they prefer to go by. So the same way that you might apply to the respect and calling someone doctor, that also applies for religious affiliation, such as sister or father or other kind of titles. The electronic medical record that I think a lot of us employ now actually has a lot of really useful, helpful tips. So one of the things that you can use is nicknames in the electronic medical record. And I think this is something that we do often in pediatrics too, where someone's name might be John, but they prefer to go by Johnny, or for example, or even if they just have a different nickname that might be different than their name, where it'll list their given name, and then you can put in a nickname where it puts their preferred name in quotation marks. Or you can also use the social history as another place to document the stories around a person's name. And if that's too complicated, then you can also put in the phonetic pronunciation of a name just right in your note. So for example, Mr. Juarez, you can see that the phonetic pronunciation is put in right there. Thanks so much for joining. I hope you enjoy your meeting. And then Additional application to healthcare. This is something that I hope that we're able to apply in the future. So I've seen a lot of places now have badge modification. So for example, they'll list the title underneath the badge, like physician or physical therapist or resident or other things, or sometimes they have their pronouns on their badge. I think it would be great if we can get to a place where clinicians have name badges with the phonetic spelling as well. And we can also promote each other by calling each other by our titles. I think often this is something that comes up in medicine where, you know, we might refer to a colleague just by their first name. And that I think can lead to, one, the physician not feeling valued and important for their title, and then also can lead really patients to feeling like they haven't had a chance to, they don't know people's roles. There are so many of us often that show up on a medical team. And I've heard constantly from patients like, I haven't spoken to a doctor all day, when oftentimes they've met many physicians that day, but just weren't aware that that was their title because it might not have been introduced in their name. And so now we'll get to our case-based discussions. And I think for the sake of time, maybe we can just all go through the first case together, and that way we can leave some time for questions at the end. So if I can get 2 volunteers to just read out, or actually 3 volunteers, one of them can be Dr. Miller, one can be Dr. Patel, and I can actually read the role of Miss Jones.
I can be Dr. Miller.
Great, thank you.
I can be Dr. Patel.
Okay, awesome.
All right. So hello, Miss Jones. I'm Dr. Miller, and this is my colleague, Chris.
Hi, Miss Jones. My name is Dr.
Nice to meet you both.
Ms. Jones, today we'll be reviewing the results of your recent lab work and biopsy, which Chris here will now begin reviewing.
All right, so we have a couple of case discussion questions here. I'll just read through all of them and people can feel free to unmute themselves and answer any of these. So first of all, what happened in this scenario and what kind of power dynamics were at play here? How do you think this might affect the relationship between the resident and the intern? How might you address this situation? And I'd love to hear from people. I think a lot of us have had similar experiences. And have you ever had a time where you were addressed incorrectly in a workplace? And how did that make you feel? And what did you do about it? I think some people have to go. And if you have to go, that's completely fine. Thanks for joining. But for those who are able to stick around for a few minutes, maybe we can just discuss for the next 5 minutes. Feel free to unmute.
So the resident clearly shortened the intern's name, and she called him Chris on multiple occasions. I think.
Dr. Williams, if you could just speak a little closer to the mic.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I was on the headset earlier. I said clearly the resident, the intern's name is Krishna, but the resident shortened it to Chris in front of a patient. And there's a power dynamic because obviously the resident has the more power in the situation. The intern may not feel comfortable saying, correcting her. And I'm assuming Dr. Miller is a her, I don't know. I should have asked that first and foremost. And also number 2, it was done in front of a patient. So there's a certain type of vulnerability there. And I think what would have happened if I were the intern, I may have pulled the resident to the side and say, I prefer to refer to my name as Krishna, not Chris. Chris is basically taking an Asian American name and Americanizing it because it's easier. But again, that's me. I have a mouth. It's not everyone has a mouth on them. And I'm also at a point in my life where I just tell people what it is. But I think it's unfortunate because, or it's possible the intern said it's okay to call me Chris. We don't know.
I think in this case, I echo what Renee said, but I think in PED, we see ourselves a little bit more informal. And so it used to be really common that we would say our first names and not say doctor. And we found PED is also a more female predominant specialty. So if you're a female, on top of say you're someone who's underrepresented, I think it's actually really important that you use that because most of the time as a default, you're assumed to not be the physician. So we've actually explicitly told our residents that they need to say that they are Dr. X. So it doesn't become this, like some people say that, other people say their first name. And so I think it is kind of important to have consistency across groups.
I will answer the last question. I think sometimes not looking a typical American and I'm a very, very petite person. When I work at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, I was always put into the nurses' emails, and they presume that there is nothing wrong to be a nurse, but I wasn't a nurse, they always made that mistake. So it's common, I guess, to have that presumption.
It is very common, in fact, to have that presumption. I think something that was really important for me starting residency was having it be set as a precedent to introduce yourself with your title. And so I think that was really important for me, because even so, I still get mistaken all the time for a different role, despite introducing myself with my title. But I think introducing myself also with my title has helped me to feel more in the role of a physician, even though I think it's very often that we have imposter syndrome or feel like we're just playing a part. And so it's something that unexpectedly, I think, has really added to my identity.
And something I forgot to mention, or I think you guys mentioned, that the resident called
Renee, you're cutting out.
Sorry, I said the intern was called Chris, not Dr. Patel. I think you guys mentioned. I'm going to call back through the thing.
Yeah, I think maybe what Renee was saying is kind of a double whammy, like they nicknamed them and they didn't call them a doctor on top.
Exactly. Yes. Multiple themes at play here with westernizing names, assigning somebody a different name, not using their title, not asking them what they prefer to be called in front of patients. So there are a lot of different things that are at play here. And on top of that, we know that there is this hierarchical structure in medicine that often makes it challenging for someone to speak up or correct somebody else. So I think it's really important that a lot of us here have said, that we've talked about some of the tools for correcting name mispronunciation and talking about asking someone to pronounce their name, so that hopefully these types of scenarios in the future aren't applied. There is one more case that, for the sake of time, we won't go through. I'll just, maybe if we can put it up on the screen, just so you all have a chance to look at it, and then you can think about it maybe at a later time. This case, I'll just read it out loud very quickly. It says, after a busy morning of rounds, Dr. Dole heads to his afternoon clinic. He walks in to greet his first patient, who is a 65-year-old woman and a new patient. He says, "Hi, Mary, how are you?" She responds and says, "Oh, my name is Maria." Dr. Dole responds and says, "Oh, I apologize, Maria." So there are a lot of important things to talk about with this case as well, that we won't get into just for the sake of time. And maybe if we can just kind of skip ahead to the end, Dr. Williams, just so to go through the take-home points.
I think a lot of us have been addressed. Anyone from I hate the term minoritized background, but that's the truth, is involved and mistaken for another role. That's just, if it hasn't happened to you, it's going to happen to you at some point. For even a woman, it's going to happen to you also. So that's a definitive. How you deal with it is up to individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe if we can kind of move along to the recap and resources slide, and we'll just discuss. So I hope that you all, through this talk, were able to examine the importance of name pronunciation and identity affirmation, look at the historical instances of racism, that contribute to name mispronunciation, and that you leave here with some tools to engage in productive conversation around name pronunciation, as well as applying these name affirmation tools to case scenarios, and hopefully also in your clinical, medical education settings, and personal and professional lives. And so just to highlight the key points again, names are deeply personal and really have complex ties to identity and racial microaggressions. The main takeaways for pronunciation are: 1, just ask; 2, practice, practice, practice; and 3, we're all prone to make mistakes, so just own them and correct them. incorporate some of the tools here into the electronic medical record, your professional settings, your email, your social media accounts, and your personal life. And with that, thank you all for joining. I think that this survey is actually going to be sent out separately through the conference, and so no need to click on the link right now, but I'd love to just open it up for questions or comments if people have any.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I mean, something I try to do, honestly, is I try to pronounce names correctly, and I've had people say, oh, don't worry about it. I said, no, it's important.
I agree. I didn't catch it on all of the roles of folks that are on this call, but I think particularly for us that are in educational leadership roles, the importance of role modeling this is really important because, again, the hierarchy structure and people, might not feel comfortable like saying, actually, please don't call me that. So I think it's really important for us to proactively ask people, how do you pronounce your name? Or sometimes I think, as you said, respecting that people have individual preferences, but sometimes I even said, like, what does your mom call you? what does like somebody close to you call you, to try and understand, like, do you want this nickname? I think, as you mentioned, nicknames typically come from a place of like, I know you, and kind of have more intimate relationship. So I feel like that's why it makes it even more hurtful when people just make up a nickname, because it's usually people that don't know you either. So it's like, you don't know me, and then you're trying to like decide what my name should be. So I think it's just really important. Someone, as I do a lot for interviews, so we're constantly talking to medical students nonstop with names, all this, and a really common occurrence I used to hear was, "Oh, it's okay, my name's hard," and I was like, I told people, do not say that. It is not hard; it's unpracticed. And so I even got a couple of thank you notes saying thank you for saying that, and I stopped saying it the rest of the interview trail. So again, I think we can be really impactful in helping to reinforce this.
I think also take into account that some people have accents, and sometimes because of an accent, you may not pronounce a name properly. I mean, I came from Jamaica when I was like 13, and while people may not hear an accent, there's certain words I pronounce in certain ways. Like I put emphasis on certain letters, and that's just the way I speak because that's how it comes from just having, learning English in a different country. So I'm not being disrespectful or saying something wrong, but I can hear it sometimes, and I'll tell people, I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing it wrong, but I can't pronounce it another way because that's just how I speak. And it comes in and out of time depending on, it kind of comes and goes. But I do know there are certain words I will say, like I'll put like emphasis on certain letters just because of the accent or the, where I'm from.
I think one of the things that could help, Salma, I think, how to remember, you said say twice, because who I am, I have hard time actually to remember the Christian names than the names that were familiar to me when I grew up and from my culture. Like, what are the few tips that you can give us to remember those names?
That's a great question.
This was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think it's something that commonly comes up, especially when we are trying to pronounce names that have sounds that are different than the ones that we're used to saying and making. And so I think that people understand that and will allow you a little bit of grace. And it's not to say that you can't ask somebody again their name another time. I don't think anybody will fault you for asking them again. Sorry, do you mind telling me how to pronounce your name? I think the point where it gets a little bit repetitive is if you just dwell on it or ask multiple times over and over. And so one of the helpful tips that I've gotten anyway is using the tools that we practice with the phonetic name pronunciation to actually write down the way to pronounce someone's name. In the same way that I might do that for a patient, I also might do that for a friend. And that's part of why I asked you all actually to put the phonetic pronunciation of your names in here too, so that, once you ask somebody their name and say it, a couple of times, that way you can write it down and then practice it on your own. And so when you encounter that person again, you can say it to them and you can still ask, hey, am I saying your name correctly? Or am I pronouncing this right? Or I'm sorry, I feel like I'm mispronouncing your name. Can you tell me how to say it again? And there's no shame in asking again for clarification. It's just the first time that you ask them, you don't want it to be something where you're like, one more time, again, come again, another time.
I forget names all the time anyway, so I tell people, listen, I know your face, but I do not remember your name. Do not take it I mean, I'm very open. I'm like, listen, I'll walk on the street, I'll see you. I have no clue what your name is. That's just me chronically, though.
Exactly. And I think we all encounter so many people in our lives that we're used to not remembering everybody's names. And especially with masks, it adds a whole nother layer of complexity. And we've also all had our names forgotten or mispronounced. And so I think we are not unfamiliar with this and are willing to allow people some grace too.
Hey, Salma, excellent presentation. I'm in the audience here. Ashley is taking care of everything. So I think we have like 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes, but I just wanted to give you, I know that you submitted your module, correct, right? Submitted portal?
Yes.
Congratulations. That's huge. Congratulations on having submitted it. Which takes a lot of work. And I think just in terms of going into that part, the review of the module, I really appreciate that. One, it's innovative, it's genuine, it's generalizable, right? It's something that everyone can learn from. So I think that that's going to make a very strong submission. You had multiple components that is what's needed. So you had a reflection exercise, you had cases, you had video-based education, you also had literature to support what you were saying, evidence-based. So those are all core components of having a strong submission. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of those features, because that just took a certain level of investment. And that definitely made it a very engaging and interactive session. So thank you for your hard work and congratulations.
Thanks so much. And thank you all for joining. I really appreciate everyone taking the time and letting me participate in this conference. Thank you.